Um, Now we will pass directly to the first speech. Mariem Chackrun from Enol will talk about co-creation concept and toolkit. Enol has been doing an amazing work with all the implementers of Catalysis within the project with the part of the co-creation, but today she will also gives us more example on what are the toolkits and also maybe a broader panorama of what is the co-creation concept and how is it utilized within and all. The floor to you, Mariam.
Thank you. Thank you, Suida. Thank you, Laura. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm one of the project partners on Catalysis, and we are, as an all European network of living labs, we are bringing our expertise in the living lab methodology, which is one of the key acceleration services, as Laura was mentioning, in Catalysis. So today I'm happy to introduce the concept of co-creation in general, but also in the Living Lab. And I'm going to present first the co-creation as a concept, and later on I will present the co-creation toolkits that we created as Enol on a previous project called Una Lab, which can be useful for you, and it's accessible also online. So as a reminder, what is a living lab is the living labs are open innovation ecosystems. Sorry, yeah. Are you still seeing my screen, right?
Yes.
Yes. So the living labs are open innovation ecosystems in real life environment based on systematic user co-creation approach that integrates research and innovation activities in communities, placing, of course, citizens at the center of innovation. Why they are open? Because we are not working within the project with the project members, but also we open to involve external stakeholders to innovate with us and to co-create solutions. And as you can see in the definition, the citizens are at the center of innovation. So we are taking their knowledge and know-how to create new solutions that are aligned with their needs. As you can see on the screen, we involve in this process the quadruple helix stakeholders, which are the government and public sector, the industry and business, academia and universities, and civil society and citizens. We applied the Living Labs methodology in Catalysis as one of the key acceleration services. And it's very important to mention here that the acting living labs within Catalysis are not permanent living labs, but we were using the methodology to accelerate the change and the institutional transformation. And academia was the key stakeholders in the process, but also we learned and we managed to involve more stakeholders in the process. So we create this open innovation ecosystem that I was mentioning. And why the living labs are important for higher education institutions and transformation is because it enhances the role of universities in local innovation ecosystems and also support the transition to knowledge and digitally driven higher education institutions that mainstream open science practices and include research and innovation output in teaching. This methodology also helps engage citizens in solving societal challenges and contributing to green and digital transformation of Europe. Here you can see in the screen the 6 main building blocks of the living labs, and as you can see, co-creation is one of them. but it goes hand in hand with the multi-stakeholder participation components, because we create solutions and products not only for them, but with them. So co-creation and multi-stakeholder participations are two elements that are very important in the process. As a reminder, when we talk about multi-stakeholder participation, those are individuals, but also organizations who are not only involved in the process and interested in particular in living labs or on project, but anyone who can be affected by the output, by the living lab solution and project solution. And their input has a direct impact on the living lab and projects upshot. As I was mentioning, the stakeholders, the different stakeholder categories are the public sector, which are the local authorities, municipalities, cities, the business and industry, the research and academia, and civil society and citizens. And when it comes to projects in relation with climate change, we add the environmental aspect, which is illustrated here in the screen. Then we go back to co-creation. What is co-creation? So it's a collaborative and participatory approach to innovation that involves users, stakeholders, the ones that I was presenting, and researchers in the design, development, and testing of new solutions, products, or services. How this process goes. So it may involve a range of methods and tools for this, such as participatory workshops, surveys, interviews, focus groups, and user testing. And why the co-creation is important? It helps boost the participation of end users. The end users are the ones who will use the solutions at the end in the process of innovation. And a well-conducted co-creation process can go beyond the generation of new solutions, but also it can lead to reconfigure the system in which it takes place. And it's very important to note that to put co-creation process, to use the right methodology for this process. So we always need to adapt the right tools and methodologies to the outcomes that we are expecting to have. Warburg identified a series of influential factors that affect the level of quality of the co-creation process. And here on the screen, you can see many of them. And the ones to be encouraged is the compatibility between public organization and citizen participation, the open attitude, the presence of clear incentives for co-creation, of course, the citizen awareness and this feeling of ownership and being part of the change, and also presence of social capital. What we need to avoid in the process, in the co-creation process, is this conservative administrative culture. It means that when an organization is afraid to share ideas, to experiment, to test new solutions, or to be transparent about the decision-making process, citizens and stakeholders can be disengaged. So now I'm happy to present this co-creation toolkit, and I will later on share the link because it's online and it's very accessible. And you can find also many recommendations and the different steps to follow to use it. But first, I would like to present the context of this toolkit, how it was created. So it was created at UNALAB project, and we, as Enol, we were part of this project that ran from 2017 to 2022. And the aim of the project was to implement and demonstrate co-creative, innovative, replicable, and locally nature-based solutions to enhance the climate and water resilience of cities. In this project, we had 28 partners and 10 cities. That's the ones who were implementing, co-creating first and implementing the solutions. And we had also these front-runner cities and follower cities who were learning from the cities, the lead cities, about the best practices and solutions and the lessons learned. The main challenge in this project was climate change, as you can see on the screen, but it's very broad challenge. And the challenge can be related to many other challenges, namely biodiversity loss, flooding, water scarcity. And the opportunity that we were focusing on this project is to create nature-based solutions. And what are the nature-based solutions? Are the solutions that are inspired and supported by nature. They are cost-effective, provide environmental and social economic benefits, and make cities more resilient towards climate change. One of the nature-based solutions that we can work on is the deforestation, biofilters, and many others, or green spaces. So, of course, these nature-based solutions needed to be innovative, replicable, aligned with the local context, because not all the cities had the same level of in terms of climate challenge and context. But most importantly, these solutions needed to be co-created with partners and cities. And in this photo, you can see we started this project by connecting to the area. And you can see that here, project partners and city representative met and visited all together nature somewhere next to Tampere to connect with the area in order to better know it. So how the co-creation process started here, we started by defining the target audience for the co-creation toolkit. So first, the main target audience was the Una Lab cities, so the one who were co-creating the solutions and implementing them. But also we wanted to create this toolkit and make it open and accessible to any public or private actors, institutions, or organizations that can be interested in running co-creative workshops and seeking to find the most appropriate tool based on their needs and skills. And how was the toolkit created? So we started by analyzing, doing this research work to have an overview of publicly available toolkits to define common elements and good examples which would be applied, and also bad examples which would be avoided. And then we did this ideation collection of tools. We structured the proposition and ran multiple testing workshops with project partners. And here you can see this photo was taken in the project implementation when we were testing some co-creation toolkits. And this led to have first versions of the toolkit, online toolkit, that was refined, of course, thanks to the translation of the first testing activities and the evaluation of the users and the partners. And here you can see the final version of the toolkit, which is online now. And you can see the different categories of the toolkits. For instance, there is the need funding, so where you can find tools to discover user needs, goals, and values to get the right solution, or ideation, which is a creative thinking in the co-creation process that help unleash creativity, discover valuable insights, and generate innovative solutions. Or it can be strategy, the tools that help design action plans to achieve long-term aims. Experimentation as well is one of the categories, and you can find the tools to test and validate the developed solutions, or feedback when you have solutions already in place and you need to evaluate and have feedback from users. And you can, of course, on the online toolkit, you can browse by category, one of these 5 categories. You can also put the formats if you want to filter through, like if you want to workshop, template, method, and also time frame. How much time do you have to run your activity, and with how many group members. So you can define also the group size, and based on these elements, you can find the appropriate tool. And here you can see how you can browse the different tools on the toolkit websites. And I will share, of course, as mentioned earlier, the link in the chat so you can explore more. And here I wanted to present some examples of the tools that you can find online. And this is the Lego Series Play. And it's a tool, it's a hands-on, minds-on series game where participants are posed with challenges. They help to physically represent the challenge and use the Lego bricks to build 3D models of your thoughts. And the workshop is built on tried and tested process of building, sharing and reflecting, creating an equal playing, thinking, sharing, and learning ground for all participants. And of course, for this, you need Lego, real Lego to do it, and you need to buy. And on the website, you can also find information about this tool, the format, the time frame, the group size, the facilitation level. Here, the facilitation level is advanced because we need a skilled facilitator for this co-creative activity. And for this tool, you can also have a certification by, of course, a certification body. And you can find the required materials from the presentation slides, the post-its, pens, timers, and of course, the Legos. And on Unalab, we used this tool, of course, and it was a lot of fun and it was very engaging. And we hired a skilled facilitator to help with the workshop. On the website, you can also understand more about the benefits of the tools and the tips. There are many tips that you can use if you want to run an activity with this tool. And you can also find the different steps you can follow to run the activity. Of course, it's flexible. You can adapt it to your needs, but it gives you like a guide to better use this tool. And you can download the tool and the supporting files. There is another tool demonstration that maybe you know. It's very important that I say on the website there are many known and famous tools, but it's very nice to have them all together so you don't need to go to another website. And we have new ones that we created as well. And the fishbone analysis are one of the most known one, and this tool helps sort ideas into categories, and it can be used for structuring a brainstorming session. It's much less complex than the Lego game. You can find information about the time frame, the group size. You can run it with a large group of people, and the facilitation level is medium. So here you don't need a skilled facilitator, and you can access to all the information and the steps you need to follow, and you can run the activity. Of course, you adapt it to your workshop needs, and all you need is pen and paper and post-its. So here are the steps. Just an idea about the fishbone diagram if you don't know it. So it's a root cause analysis visualization tool that combines the practice of brainstorming and mind mapping. So this tool determines the cause effect of a problem, also known as a Ishikawa diagram, named after Dr. Ishikawa, a Japanese quality control expert. So the head of the fish is the problem, and then you have the bones to identify the different categories of the causes, and then through the 5 why you can identify the contributing factors to the main causes. And here are the steps. So you start by identifying specific problem based on the evidences of data you have gathered. And then you brainstorm and write down the main categories of the causes as is shown on the diagram. And then as the third step, you find all the possible causes of the problem by asking why every time and write them down as branches from the appropriate categories. So you continue with the 5 why process to discover a deeper level of the causes. Here is an example of a problem. Of course, if we ask why are we're not selling more, because we are not able to produce more. Why? Because we have reached our production capacities. Why? Because we don't have enough developers. Why? Because we have used the budget. And the last why is because CFO cut it in order to save money. So we can go to the main problem that we might ignore at the beginning of the brainstorming. So here how it looks digitally, it looks very nice, but in real, when you run a workshop, it's a bit messier, as you can see in the pictures with the post-its, but I think in co-creation process, it's nice when it's messy because you come up with many ideas and yeah. That's it. This is the end of my presentation, and I will share the link of the co-creation toolkit in the chat. So feel free to explore it, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mariem. So we will have the chance to check them later. Now we'll go from co-creation to co-design, and our speaker will talk about co-design as a driver of adaptive and learning-oriented institutions. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, Gioia. Gioia is our colleague in EY, and she is a senior manager, and she's specializing in digital transformation, learning design, and change management. But maybe, Gioia, if you can just briefly introduce yourself better, and so also the other colleagues from Catalysi and other participants of the webinar knows you. We know that you do an amazing job in EY and a very interesting and creative one, and can't wait to listen to your presentation. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Saida. So, as mentioned, my name is Gioia Carbini. Nice to meet you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a senior manager at EY, and I specialize in learning architecture, digital transformation, and change management related at the same time to public institutions. I hold a specialization from the University of Florence in relation to inclusive decision making. So this is why this is very dear to my heart, the topic of today's meeting. And over the years, I have led, different programs that combined instructional design, stakeholder engagement, change management, and strategic facilitation. So very happy to be here and to talk about, what is co-design and how we are seeing co-design change the shape and the governance of public institutions at this stage. So I will present briefly my screen. Just give me a sec. Okay, sharing. You should be able to start seeing it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So once again, very happy to be here. It is a pleasure to discuss these different topics we have decided to present to you, to show to you today. As mentioned, my speech, as I would like to say, is about co-design as a driver of adaptive and learning-oriented institutions. So I will try to define which are some paradigms related to what we are currently seeing, the trends, and how these trends make us think about co-design as something different than what it was before. So from this perspective, firstly, I will discuss how we can reframe co-design. What is really what I call the complexity challenge. So how we have defined and so the traditional approaches sometimes tend to fall short because we have different situations and scenarios right now that make them sometimes not so adaptable to what we are currently, seeing and viewing in terms of how the world is progressing. And so from this perspective, what we call co-design today is not what we used to call it before. So I would not refer to co-design as a set of facilitation techniques, or just not a set of facilitation techniques or participatory moments, because I would like to make them seen as something totally different. That starts from the facilitation techniques, obviously. That start from how to engage communities, audiences, targets audiences to these specific, particularly participatory moments, but at the same time, trying to understand that what is happening across many institutions right now is a more profound shift. So right now, organizations are discovering that the challenges that they face cannot be planned so much in advance, cannot be dealt with, a siloed experience, cannot be dealt with a top-down or not just a top-down coordination. So the world is changing, and what research is showing us is that, from a public sector perspective, we are seeing that we have higher education transformations, sustainability transformations, public sector innovations. These are all drivers that guide us into what co-design truly is and how we can apply co-design in these specific institutions. Because while we have different studies, and they obviously differ in scope, because this is the reality, we can find a true pattern. And what this pattern is that institutional challenges increasingly emerge at the intersection of different domains. So they are shaped by interdependence from one side, they are shaped by overlapping mandates sometimes, and they are shaped by shifting expectations. So these expectations from the outside world shift very, very abruptly sometimes. So this leads us to reflect on the fact that many of the assumptions that used to be true in the past, that used to reflect, many of the assumptions that used to guide us, in terms of strategic planning, for example, or in decision-making processes, no longer hold the value that they did before. because they are not very capable to truly hold or to create through meaning when uncertainty becomes structural rather than exceptional. So when we see these changes in the current institutional world and in general, the current world, not just for public institutions or for the public sector, we tend to see that uncertainty is become a very much structural phenomenon. And so this is not something that happens once in a while or, very much drifted apart. They are very, very interconnected. And so all these elements suggest that institutions require some different forms of inquiry, I would say, and at the same time, some different forms of decision making. Because what we would like to do is to be able to engage with complexity differently. So we don't want to reduce complexity. We want to change the perspective. We want to truly address the complexity and engage with complexity. And so in an environment where, problems evolve through all these interactions and all these domains, systems, stakeholders, actors, etc., what the true bottleneck is, in my personal perspective, is not in some terms the lack of expertise into dealing and managing this type of complex difficulties issues, but is the lack of what we call, what I call a shared sense making. So the ability to construct what we can call sort of common understanding, or what the true problem is. So why this problem? What is this problem? Why it matters? What is realistically possible to do to resolve the constraints we are currently facing in terms of governance, in terms of interdependency? So co-design in these terms help us and guide public institutions to understand what the true problem is and how we can involve, participants and audiences from the very beginning to start not to react to the problem or the issue at hand, but to proactively respond to the problem before it even creates a problem. And so, co-design enters the conversation in this specific perspective. And it's important to define, as mentioned before, what co-design is in what I perceive co-design to be. So co-design is not the mere consultation, in my personal perspective, and it is clearly consultation. It is a mechanism for collecting opinions. It is a way to research, true meaning. But at the same time, co-design is a structure involvement of diverse actors in truly shaping how we frame the problems that we have. So we try to understand together the constraints that we face, how trade-offs are negotiated, and how solutions can be iterated during time. So how a design is not something that is it is deliberative more than it is, extractive, and at the same time it's more iterative rather than episodic. So we're not discussing just about something that happens once in a while, and it's truly something that is systemic rather than transactional. So we do that from a systemic perspective, and it surely reflects, the openness to different perspectives. This is the basis of co-design. But what I would like to say is that it goes beyond what we call, openness, because it truly enables institutions to understand how different problems are experienced across different target groups and different layers of the system. So at the same time, it gives us the opportunity to reflect on how decisions reverberate across boundaries, across layers, and how alignment can be built around those shared interpretations rather than imposed directives coming from a top-down approach. And so when we think about that, and if we take a look at the current dynamics that lead us to consider that co-design is gaining relevance, as you might understand, it's not because participation, from one side, yes, it could be, but from the other side, it's not because participation has become more fashionable in some sort of way. but it's because institutions and institutional scenarios have become more complex. And universities, public authorities, and all these multi-actor ecosystems operate in conditions where demographic shifts, but not just demographic shifts, digital transitions, external shocks, and evolving expectations truly show a situation where no single unit, no single stakeholder can fully anticipate what this could lead to. So, in terms of, global events, wars, sustainability, social climate, etc. So, what we can do is that we use co-design to provide exactly an interpretative infrastructure to those problems. And so when I don't know, attention surfaces or when some friction points become very, very much visible, we need to find those as opportunities because through the co-design, we allow different groups to test assumptions before implementation. We challenge mental models that we have because we all have biases as we are, human. And so as we are human, we have biases, we have our model of thinking and our specific way of reacting to things. But what we can do through co-design is challenge those mental models, to challenge the language that probably in my board, in my restricted group, it is, considered as a shared language, and to truly understand the problem at hand by seeing it differently, by challenging our mental perspective, by challenging our constructed opinions that we also built over time, obviously. So in the sense, co-design is less about bring people in. So it surely is about bring people in, but at the same time, it's more about building the institution's capacity to learn from its own complexity. So to understand that complexity is structural, that we can address complexity, but we cannot efface complexity, we cannot erase it. And this is why we go from a shift from what we call collaboration to co-ownership. So from one side, collaboration asks people to contribute to a process that sometimes is already defined elsewhere. So sometimes we decide a process that is decided in a very restricted group, and we then ask for validation. On the contrary, co-design is more about co-ownership. So we ask them. So we ask to the people who is participating to the process to take responsibility at the same time for how the problem is understood and how solutions are shaped. So it is also a redistribution of agency in a way that strengthens, from one side, legitimacy, because if we distribute agency, we at the same time touch upon what is legitimate to do, but also on alignment, internal alignment, external alignment, overall alignment, and implementation. So when people participate in constructing the meaning of an issue, their commitment to decision is different, clearly, because it's higher from one side, but at the same time, it's more resilient because it's anchored in a shared understanding of the issue at hand, in a shared understanding of the process. And so we have examples from recent university, reforms that illustrate this. So we have some institutions that have embedded mixed design committees where students, could participate, but not just students, but at the same time, for example, researchers, staff, that start to review, for example, a curriculum, an entire curriculum just on the basis of their perceptions, and at the same time, before any solution is proposed, that is a very important issue at hand. And others, others public institutions have created strategic design committee or strategic design labs to create a connective tissue between operation from one side, governance, institution from the other, and at the same time with the public. So the value of co-design, in my perspective, does not just lie in having more voices into the room, but in allowing those voices to shape the institutional logic through which, choices are made. And so co-design becomes some sort of strategic lever because it changes the conditions under which strategy itself is produced. So when we think about traditional planning models, we assume that institutions can first make sense of their environment and then they act. Co-design reverses a bit this perspective because it treats institutional clarity as something that emerges through the interaction between different actors and different perspectives. And moreover, from different perspectives are usually separated. So an academic perspective, an administrative perspective, they have totally different objectives and totally different minds, I'd say. A student perspective, a community-facing perspective. So we truly tackle all the different perspectives that we have at hand. And so in concrete terms, this means that strategic framing is no longer a top-down exercise, but is a process of progressive alignment. So we surfacing, what is structural tensions earlier. So when we try to detect what these tensions could be, when we challenge the assumptions that we have and that we have as humans, and when we expose unrealistic expectations, we apply a strategic level. We apply co-design to a strategic level. So we can have the ability to reveal what are the contradictions that, from some perspective, will remain latent during the process, So, for example, when we have, disparities between institutional ambition and resource structures. So we have, from one side, an objective, a strategic objective related to what is the ambition regarding the specific institution and what we have in terms of, resources. So do we have enough resources to proceed with, implementation of the ambition? And at the same time, also the perceptions and the assumptions that students, for example, might have. So the desired student experience, what we would like to give to students in terms of, public institution, and at the same time, what is the organizational operational model. So sometimes we see that we have very big difficulties trying to correlate the two. So we try through, co-design to reshape the cognitive architecture of strategic planning. So from, what we know and we want the strategy to be. And so this is why co-design becomes closely linked to what we call adaptive and learning-oriented institutions, because it strengthens the very capabilities to define what I think is an institutional learning. So a learning-oriented institution is not just one that trains people or trains more people or evaluates more or documents more, but it is one that continuously revises the way the institution itself interprets emerging signals, for example. So shifts in students' behavior, shifts in students, registering to the university, changes in patterns from one operational model perspective, but at the same time, from the public perspective, tensions between policy and operational reality, clearly, and adjust accordingly. So what makes an institution learning oriented is the ability to turn these signals that we see into shared insights and not make them just isolated observations. So to translate what we see into something that is a true data-driven, some sort of repository. So co-design truly supports us because provides the infrastructure for this type of learning. So it creates a structured moments in which those assumptions I was mentioning, at the same time, implicit theories, routines, etc., can be made visible and examined collectively. So we try through co-design to operationalize learning through that. So we try to learn from what we have done before and try to see where the gap is. So, for example, where a form of process that we have applied in the past and it worked probably, how this could change during time and how the process that we have in place diverge from the lived experiences of students, for example. So what is, the delta, the gap between lived experience and, what is on paper? And so what I would like to do right now is just to go through some paradigms that I think are relevant. I will try to be very light on that, but I think that we have more or less 6 paradigms that are worth discussing together, because from one side, we see that what we do is to making a shift from decision making to consequence making. So a shift that concerns the locus of institutional attention. So because from a long time, in my perspective, governance model focus primarily on decision making. So we define the problem, we select different strategic, options, and then we formalize the choices that we have made together. But in complex systems, decisions do not conclude a process; they begin one. So the consequences that we face propagate across different organizational layers, to different stakeholder groups, etc. And so I think it leads us to reflect on the fact that institutional performance depends less on the elegance, of the decision and more on the institutional ability to anticipate, to understand, and to govern its consequences. So co-design becomes central precisely because it brings into the same space those who will live these consequences. So friction points surface earlier at the very beginning, not during implementation. We see them. We see them, the frictions at the very beginning. We can explore the effects that this friction could have if solutions are implemented. We can prepare better to how to avoid those frictions and at the same time to avoid some tensions or some perspectives remaining visible. So in this perspective, in my personal perspective, co-design strengthens foresight, and this is very important in complex context. But at the same time, we shift from what is, the general idea of consensus to what is truly important, so coherence, because from one side, consensus has long been treated as an ideal outcome. We have plenty of literature regarding how consensus is, unanimity in some sort. And so near unanimity, we can call it, but at the same time that those type of consensus, those type of unanimity has historically and scientifically been associated with stability and legitimacy. I think that in contemporary institutional environments, consensus is rarely achievable, truly. And when it is, it's not always, it does not reflect truly clarity, but more accommodation in some ways. And what institutions need is not necessarily unanimity, but I think it's more coherence between, their strategic priorities, their constraints, between their ambitions and the true capabilities that they have, and between the perspective of those who will enact the decisions and the perspective who will suffer the consequences of the decisions, or will see the impacts of the decision you made. So we can create coherence through co-design because it makes, as I mentioned, tensions visible at the very beginning. And we can act on divergent interpretations at the very beginning of the process, guaranteeing coherence. That is not, we need to have the same idea and we need to arrive at a certain result. But we can shift, the idea that consensus is necessary. What is necessary is more an alignment on interpretations and a comprehensive, understanding of what we are currently dealing with and of different perspectives. So, one of the causes of that is that we see a third shift, as I mentioned, that concerns the nature of these interdependence. Interdependence is a structural condition. Institutional systems are porous, so decisions in one area have effects across different areas, in different domains, in different levels of governance. So, um, you know, implementation unfolds through different decision points, not just one. And so contemporary public administration studies reinforce this. So outcomes depends on how actors across layers enact decisions and interpret decision at the very beginning. So co-design responds to this condition by offering a structured way to explore how different parts of the system interact. So consequences surface earlier than before, interpretation can be compared at the very beginning, and the interdependencies are discovered, and can become visible. And so that is something that can work truly in our favor because we can expand the knowledge base, so we can understand how, also the role of expertise is changing because many institutional decisions can no longer be or rely solely on the authority of specialists, of very vertical experts, because sometimes we need to think about, the limitation of the technical mandate. So experts remain indispensable. So we cannot think about erasing the vertical experience. This is not what I'm saying, obviously, but sometimes it's not sufficient because we need to integrate experiential knowledge, operational knowledge, and at the same time, interpretative knowledge. So we need to integrate this form of knowledge that comes from people who experience a problem daily, of those who, navigate the effects of a decision and the constraints. So we need to integrate different knowledge, types of knowledge. So from one side, co-design truly complements, from one side technical expertise, but at the same time, we have in the room the people who truly experienced what is this decision that we're currently making from their daily lives perspective. So we integrate a constellation of knowledge that is not just a very vertical one, but is shared plethora of different types of knowledge. And this is something that is changing. And what is changing is at the same time how we use AI from this perspective. So a further paradigm concern, the integration of AI into co-design. That is something that we have some recent studies related to that. Clearly, they are very recent as we are been talking about AI more frequently during recent times. But we have research from 2025 related to how human AI interactions could support, the co-creative design process. and it was made by Park, the design researcher. And so in these studies that experience they conducted, AI-assisted tools were used to produce alternatives perspectives. So, for example, with a problem at hand, the AI tool was used to challenge the main perspective, to challenge and to pose questions that were challenging to the participants. And so it was used, and it was very useful to expand human interpretation. So participants, for example, in this case, in this study, reported that AI was valuable in providing suggestions because they thought that these were useful provocations to, think outside the box. Obviously, with some caveat, clearly, because the study at the same time showed that the type of responses the AI gives are very much interdependent with the facilitation methods. So this is something that we need to take into consideration, and at the same time we cannot take AI suggestions at face value. Because obviously the results that are shown are dependent on the relationship between AI and the human side, of the usage of the tool. So clearly we have some risks. From one side, AI generated outputs could be or could reinforce dominant responses or dominant assumptions. This is something that we know that AI does. But if we apply, our reasoning to the way in which AI could be used in the design process, this is something that we can reflect on also during futures, reflections, because obviously the value is not automatic, because we have a different category of points of attention that we need to take, because we can have the risk, as I mentioned, of overtrusting the reality of what the algorithm is currently saying to us. The models, the LLMs tend to recreate the dominant patterns, so they try to reproduce the patterns that are dominant. And so if we have a dominant opinion, yes, they could tend to side with the dominant perspective. But these concerns, in my perspective, reinforce the need for co-design in this perspective, because they make clear that AI must be situated within a process that is deliberative and explicitly human-led. So this is the reality of things. So if we facilitate a co-design process, a co-design moment, and we do that with the use of AI, with a human facilitation, human interaction with AI could be very useful to challenge perspective when there is a dominant pattern that is, being the atmosphere and being the background of this scenario. And lastly, I would like to touch upon, the last paradigm, that is, the work on inclusivity and how we can guarantee the inclusivity in terms of co-design. And this is something that is true, embedded in a lot of researches that are currently being held or that have been led in previous years. Because co-design, if we use it in a systemic way, truly responds to the reality that we face by treating those interfaces that we have not as points of consultation, merely points of consultation, but as design environments in their own right. So when we think about students, early career staff, for example, are very different and have very different assumptions and designs rather than, seasoned experts. When they participate in structured interpretative work, they gain access to forms of knowledge they cannot generate internally, as I mentioned. And the inclusive dimension is therefore not an ethical accessory. It's just a condition. So we need to take into consideration how the inclusive dimension is a condition, a necessary condition At the same time, not just from an ethical perspective, but also for accuracy, because systems reveal their behavior only when those who experience their consequences contribute to their interpretation. So, when we see them together, systemic and inclusive co-design expand the institution's field of view, because from one side, we have one that reveals how interconnected the system is, and the other ensures that his interconnections are interpreted through the full diversity of experiences that constitute, the reality of the institutions. And I think it is very relevant and obviously to consider, this ethical perspective, not just as an ethical one, that is clearly the main focus when we talk about diversity, inclusion, but at the same time, how it is beneficial to have this type of perspective, not from an ethical standpoint, but at the same time from an accuracy standpoint. And lastly, I wanted to show you two cases actually that are related to two universities, one in Scotland and one in England, that have implemented programs that were directed towards implementing using co-design from the very beginning of a decision process. And so the very first example that I want to discuss is the one I was mentioning from Scotland, so the University of Edinburgh, that decided to, and is currently doing that. So it's not something that is clearly, predefined and already we can see the results. It's something that is in theory, so it is in the implementation phase. But regarding what they did related to the strategy 2030 that they have developed during last year, they decided to start a program that was called curriculum transformation. There was an initiative that the university set to revise, the shape and organization of its curriculum. And they explicitly located this work with a process described as collaboration and dialogue with staff, students, and additional stakeholders. So this is a co-design process. And what the university particularly and publicly did was to, apologize, I clicked on the mouse. What the university did actually was to define their ambition. So they wanted to have a curriculum that was clear, structured, and it was aligned with different expectations and assumptions and needs for the population that they have. So they started the process with different moments of not just listening, but through co-design to create a student vision and which were the design principles for the different curriculum and the overall curricular architecture. So they decided to involve academic staff, students, professional services, external partners, etc. So a plethora of different actors. And what I think is very relevant is that they understood, so the University of Edinburgh understood that creating curriculum has a social meaning and has this, as this reasoning is so relevant, they thought that they needed to be interpreted collectively. So they wanted to, from one side, make understandable which are different experiences from different ethnic groups, but not just different ethnic groups, but in general, they wanted to have the full scenario, the full picture, and they wanted to reflect those principles, so inclusivity, equal access, representation within the current curriculum. And at the same time, they made this relationship between diversity and inclusion and design very visible because they defined that the decision structure had, and so how they created this process of decision-making process had social and distributive consequences. So they wanted to engage different voices to avoid for the people to feel, or the students to feel not appreciated, not included from one side to the university, but for the other side to the decision-making process. And the other example is the University of Leeds, where they started a very organic process of co-design and a very institutionalized one, because they truly built an infrastructure that was, called, in this case, curriculum redefined, and they decided to embark into this long-term effort to reconsider all these programs and all their curriculum over, a chunk of time, obviously, and to redefine how they view their offer, academic offer. So they started to facilitate different moments that involved, very vertical roles, so heads of school, program leads, etc., with students, workers, and different partners to truly examine how the program works. And at the same time, they created what is called the learning design team. That was an institutionalization of the process, clearly, and they were charged with leading these moments through methodology. So from this perspective, what they did was to truly create and try to institutionalize co-design. And, each school, for example, received a package information, so data of enrollment, students' feedback, national surveys, institutional frameworks, etc. So they decided to give them data at the very beginning. Then they had design days where, there were the participation of the different audiences. And then the process combined quantitative data with lived experience, institutional experiences, etc., in a single design space. And at the very end, they had not just full participation, but they invested design capacity, because they created the team. And at the same time, they decided to offer, a period of time. So, for example, there was one school, the School of Geography, that after a 12-month period where staff and students worked together to formulate this shared vision for the future and for what the degree of the School of Geography should feel like and should look like. And they started generating a lot of comments and a lot of different perspectives were then condensed into what is called a document called Student Priorities. That was their specific contribution to the curriculum redefined project. Later, they started town halls. So they created events that brought together more than 300 students and different actors, and they requested feedback on the degree experience. So they created a process that was co-designed from the very beginning, and they clarified that this work depended on data because they started with feedback, survey, etc. But at the same time, they decided that co-design was not an one-off experiment, but was an ongoing capacity that they wanted to leverage on. And so this is why I think these two examples are very relevant in present times, and I think they truly create not from not just a positive experience clearly, but from my perspective they are very relevant because they show two different ways of dealing with co-design. From one side, a very institutionalized one, and from the other side, a tentative program that created an interconnection between inclusivity, accessibility, and how students perceive themselves into an institution like University of Edinburgh. And so I think that this experience collectively demonstrate that the value of co-design emerges, at two levels. from one side, the quality of the collaboration itself, and in what such collaboration enables institutions to learn about their own reality, their own systems, and their own decision-making processes. So, they can see systemic consequences. They can see, how we need alignment through shared comprehension, not through consensus, as I mentioned, and at the same time, how co-design truly integrates forms of, different type of knowledges. So they are usually separated, but at the same time, I can contribute as a student. I can contribute to the decision of, the revision of a curriculum, and I, a staff, a member of the staff or of the administrative staff, can contribute to the discussion because I have a different perspective, the student has a different perspective, and the board, the university board, has a different perspective and different assumptions and different resources and constraints. And when we come together, we see those constraints, we see those trade-offs more clearly, and we can also act on them in a more precise way. Clearly, we have some sort of, insight and implication from this perspective. And, the first implication in my personal perspective is obviously related to institutional attention. So across the experiences that we explored, decisions cease to function as endpoints. So they become true occasions for exploring what a direction would set in motion. And at the same time, what we see is that co-design is not at all, to generate consensus, as I mentioned, but more to generate coherence. So what allows institutions to act without requiring uniformity of thought. So we need to go beyond the idea that we need to have a uniformity of thoughts to find a shared solution. And at the same time, when we use co-design with intention, co-design becomes less a practice and more an organizing principle for institutional intelligence. So it creates a shared interpretive infrastructure in which we can move, So it's a collective capacity of sense making that persists at the same time beyond the moment of the design itself. So institutions that can cultivate these co-design practices in a systemic way develop a form of cognitive resilience, in my personal perspective, because they become better at anticipating frictions, they become better at navigating uncertainty, and they become better at the very end at understanding themselves, the institution itself, not just the outside world, but better to understand their own reality. So, in my perspective, the insight that truly ties everything together is that co-design works at the same time to give the institution a more complete mind. So, in environments that are defined by interdependence, uncertainty, etc., the shared capacity to interpret the system becomes the foundation for acting with clarity, with coherence. So, co-design, in my personal perspective, is a way for institutions to think together, and that capability, more than any specific outcome, is what enable institutions to transform with integrity. So this was my personal perspective. I hoped you liked, and I'm free to respond if you have any questions.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, Gioia, and for bringing us also concrete examples so we can see how institutions go through this process, and also for bringing us this at least for us, that we are not working directly with co-creation, and we do not still use co-creation in our projects or in our everyday work or in our implementers of Catalysis higher education institutions everyday work.